Okay, there's something really interesting going on with the relationship between 2001: A Space Odyssey and Rosemary's Baby. These are twin films in terms of the plot and what is depicted. In 2001: A Space Odyssey, Dave Bowman goes through the portal or Stargate and comes out the other end as the Star Child. It's a birth of sorts, where in the way that it's depicted by Kubrick in the last scene, the Star Child is overlooking the Earth like the moon does. And in this way, you can view it as the creation of the Moonchild. In the sense that 2001: A Space Odyssey is directly referencing 9/11 and the monolith that they would eventually place there to overlook the events of that day in 2001. And then, because Donald Trump is the personification of that event in New York City, he is likewise associated with 2001: A Space Odyssey and everything that was infused into that film. And indeed, he is the Moonchild. He was infused with the ability via this symbolism to pull on everyone's water, gravitationally speaking. He has this ability to direct consciousness. Likewise, Rosemary's Baby was released later that year on June 12th, 1968. And the plot of that film is very similar, just depicted in a different way, where this woman is inseminated with Satan's seed, as it were, and is giving birth to an antichrist type of figure through this ritual that she became involved in and was unaware of because they were drugging her and she just didn't understand what was going on at first. Which is very similar to how all of this propaganda interacts with us. We view it innocently as just fun movies and music, news, just culture in general. It's this innocent thing that we interact with and we don't understand what it really is. In that way, the character in Rosemary's Baby is us. And we are giving birth to this thing because we don't understand what we are involved in, and we don't understand that our creative abilities are being repurposed for this end. Our imagination is bringing things into existence via the propaganda that it is infused with. In the context of the actual plot of the film, not only was it released in June of 1968, but the birth takes place in June, which is really evoking the idea, again, of Donald Trump, the Moonchild, born June 14th, 1946, under a total lunar eclipse. In other words, these two films are twins of each other, just like Donald Trump, the Gemini Man, is the twin of 9/11, and they both are pointing towards the birth of his character and what that character would be able to achieve in terms of the long-term agenda that is in play here. Well, it just so happens that these two twin films were both released right next to these two major assassinations. 2001: A Space Odyssey is released April 2nd, 1968, and 2 days later, Martin Luther King is assassinated on April 4th, 1968. Likewise, RFK is assassinated on June 5th, 1968, and 7 days later, Rosemary's Baby is released. It also just so happens that there is a total lunar eclipse over the USA on April 13th, 1968, right in the same window of time that 2001: A Space Odyssey and Martin Luther King are interacting with each other. So I'm just wondering out loud here, but is this more subconscious foreshadowing of an assassination of the Moonchild? Twin films that relate to the birth of this figure, at least in terms of the propaganda that was infused into the character. It doesn't necessarily have to mean the actual physical birth of the human or the thing taking the human form. It could just relate to the propaganda, and in that way, the character was designed to be assassinated, and that's why all of this assassination foreshadowing is infused into it as well. The character was built up to be assassinated because the new world will be birthed through this process. And that's what the two films are alluding to, right? It's this idea of the birth of something from this propaganda. JFK is assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald in Dealey Plaza, which is a giant 77, or Oz. Oswald is then killed by Jack Ruby, Dorothy's ruby slippers. 9/11 is supposedly orchestrated by Osama bin Laden. You have Osama, the same as Oswald. And Osama bin Laden's alleged code name with the intelligence agencies was Tim Osman. The alleged orchestrator of 9/11 is an Oz as well. Going back to the prior video where the outside of the World Trade Center itself is mirroring Dealey Plaza, infusing the idea of the assassination of JFK into 9/11 as that relates to the twin of 9/11, Donald Trump. To hit the target, the Atari that is released in the same window in time, the late 1960s into the early 70s. Culminating in the release of that Atari 2600 on September 11th, 1977. Which, as I went into in the last video, ties everything together as it relates to the screen that is the monolith at ground zero and what devices like Atari was doing to the mind, altering it, merging it one step at a time with these screens, because that is part of the ultimate agenda. That is part of this new world that will be birthed through all of these rituals. The mind merges with technology. Very interesting that these two films in that context were released in tandem with these two assassinations. One of which was directly related to JFK, assassinated 5 years earlier on November 22nd, 1963. JFK's burial plot is a Q when you view it from above, and then they tie his son into the QAnon lore. And Donald Trump in general is the representative of QAnon. So he's embodying this idea of the assassination as it related to JFK in a different way. Indeed, this is why he is the personification of 9/11. He was built to be destroyed, just like those towers were built to be destroyed. Just like the towers that he is the personification of. The only question that remains is, are we talking about the character that is being assassinated, the character that was built to be destroyed? Or are we talking about something literal where Donald Trump, the tower, will fall in an assassination? And that will tie into the birth of this new world in different ways. Not necessarily as it relates to the mind, but just as it relates to the structure of reality itself and how this system will function. And obviously a part of that involves the destruction of the United States of America, because it cannot exist as it does currently and fit within the structure of the world governance system that they would like to bring into being. Likewise, then, he, as the personification of 9/11, is destroying America through his two terms, which are those two towers being struck by those two planes. Which makes what happened on September 11th, 1968 even more crazy, because there's an actual plane crash, a ritual sacrifice, blood spilled on September 11th of this same year, where two major figures are assassinated in direct relationship to these two films that are depicting the birth of this thing, the birth of this new world, the birth of this propaganda, this new age that will take over and replace what existed previously. Incidentally, there was also a total solar eclipse on September 22nd, 1968, just 11 days after the September 11th plane crash in France, which I have a note here as well relating to the plane and how it took off from the town that was the birthplace of Napoleon. And Napoleon has a direct relationship to Stanley Kubrick, because Kubrick was obsessively researching Napoleon in the hopes of making a film about him that eventually was made by another filmmaker, and so they scrapped the project. But still, it directly ties into the 2001 A Space Odyssey propaganda, subconsciously speaking. Likewise, the eclipses surrounding these events in 1968 are alluding to the propaganda that was infused into the Moonchild, who will preside over the Great American Eclipse. Those two terms coinciding directly with those two paths that make the X over the United States of America. Now, this is where it gets pretty wild. The Beatles are one of the best examples of New Age propaganda and how it functions, and just in general, how the idea that, quote unquote, Satan masquerades as an angel of light actually functions. What are the lyrics to one of the Beatles' most popular songs? All you need is love. John Lennon writes Imagine, this anthem that is played every time they want to manipulate people into feeling a certain type of way. It represents this idea of love, peace, and harmony. In reality, the Beatles as an entity are just like, quote unquote, Satan masquerading as that angel of light. They come to you in the name of love, but when you actually research these characters and where they came from, you quickly realize, oh wow, this was from its inception sorcery. This was designed from the very beginning to do certain things, and none of this is real. This is a real world example of something coming to you in the name of love as an angel of light, as it were, but it is not that thing. And it's no accident along those lines that the Beatles are so closely associated with the quote-unquote New Age movement. Because the New Age movement is exactly that same thing. It's Satan, quote-unquote, masquerading as an angel of light, deluding minds into thinking they are something that they are not, so that they eventually lose themselves through the process of assimilating this propaganda. In any event, the Beatles' White Album is released on November 22nd, 1968. Just a couple months after that French plane crash, on September 11th, 1968, the Beatles released the White Album on the same date as the JFK assassination. Remembering that on November 22nd, 2024, Wicked, the remake of The Wizard of Oz, is released. Kendrick Lamar releases GNX, Grand National Experimental. The Gemini Man, who then performs at the Super Bowl halftime ritual with Donald Trump, the Gemini Man, in attendance. That Stargate ritual where a video game, sort of like Atari, in this case it was PlayStation, is the stage, and it's game over at the end of the ritual. That kind of takes on a different meaning after the Atari stuff, right? It's game over both in terms of America and what Donald Trump is doing to the country itself, but also game over in terms of the mind and what it used to be. Likewise, Gladiator 2 is released on the same day in 2024, which features twin emperors who fall, alluding to the idea of America as the new Rome, the new golden age, Donald Trump as Caesar, who likewise will fall, just like Rome did, in terms of the propaganda that they have assimilated into his character. All of that took place in Caesar's Superdome. Caesar, the character, is shot in the eye, simulating an assassination in a similar way in Megalopolis, which is all about Rome, in terms of the names of all the characters and just the way the script plays out in general. The White Album was their 9th studio album, and it was first released on Apple Records. Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Steve Jobs works at Atari, and then eventually they create the first Apple personal computers and change the logo to an apple with a rainbow on it. Which takes you right back to what this propaganda and the technology we are fusing with is doing. It's somewhere over the rainbow, taking our mind to the land of Oz, taking our mind through the Stargates, as it's depicted in the Super Bowl halftime ritual. Which, go figure, is an actual apple because it's the Apple halftime show. So they take you through an Apple portal. Somewhere over the rainbow, you are being transferred to the land of Oz. The stereo version is 93:33 in length. The White Album features 30 songs, 19 of which were written during March and April 1968 at a transcendental meditation course with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in India. Charles Manson, the alleged man indirectly responsible for the 1969 Tate LaBianca murders, where Roman Polanski's pregnant wife Sharon Tate was allegedly murdered, heavily referenced the White Album and the Beatles in general. Sharon Tate was found dead near a zebra rug in her house, and the Beatles took the picture for the album cover of Abbey Road, the one where they are all walking on a zebra crossing, on the morning of August 8, 1969, around 11:30 a.m. in London, the same day that Tate was later murdered in L.A. The following evening, the night of August 9, 1969, Manson's The Family murdered supermarket executive Lino LaBianca and his wife Rosemary. These murders occurred while Rosemary's Baby was still showing in some theaters. This is the cover of Abbey Road, where you can see them walking across the zebra crossing, they take this photo the same day that Sharon Tate is allegedly murdered, and this is the zebra rug in that house that her and one of the other people that were murdered were found near. Then there is the Strawberry Fields Memorial for John Lennon, where they have a similar zebra pattern here, which goes back to the black and white checkerboard, of course, but in this case, it's an eye, right? You have the pupil and the iris, and it's getting at the same idea as the sphere in between the two towers in New York, right? It's this idea of consciousness being affected by these rituals, steered through them. The Dakota in New York City was used for exterior shots of the fictional Branford building in the movie, Rosemary's Baby. John Lennon lived in the Dakota and was murdered under its archway on December 8, 1980. Mia Farrow, the main character in Rosemary's Baby, traveled to India with the Beatles in 1968. Lennon wrote Dear Prudence about Mia Farrow's sister during their time in India. Mia Farrow was married to Frank Sinatra before getting engaged to Polanski, and Lee Harvey Oswald was said to have been influenced by Sinatra films to assassinate JFK. Judy Garland, aka Dorothy Gale from The Wizard of Oz, also lived at the Dakota. The influence of the Beatles on Charles Manson. This is just a little summary for those of you who are not familiar with this story. One of the two great influences on the thinking of Charles Manson, along with the Book of Revelation, was the musical group The Beatles. According to family members, Manson would most often quote the Beatles and the Bible. The two influences were linked in that Manson saw the four Beatles members as being the four angels referred to in Revelation 9. Revelation 9 also tells of locusts, the Beatles of course, coming out upon the earth. It describes prophets as having faces as the faces of men, but with the hair of women, an assumed reference to the long hair of the all-male English group. In Revelation 9, the four angels with breastplates of fire, or electric guitars, issued fire and brimstone song lyrics. In Beatles 64, the new documentary which charts the impact of the band's first US tour and how it catapulted them to global superstardom, Paul McCartney makes a suggestion as to why they achieved so much so quickly. When we came, it was quite shortly after Kennedy had been assassinated, he said. Maybe America needed something like the Beatles to be lifted out of sorrow. Beatles scholars and cultural historians have long remarked upon how much of a lift the band gave to an America in mourning. On January 10, 1969, Manson announced that the family were to move from the desert into a house in Canoga Park. The canary yellow house where the family temporarily settled to develop their plans for Helter Skelter was dubbed the Yellow Submarine. The Helter Skelter scenario is an apocalyptic vision that was supposedly embraced by Charles Manson and members of his so-called family. At the trial of Manson and three others for the Tate LaBianca murders, the prosecution presented it as motivating the crimes and as an aspect of the case for conspiracy. And that's a good note here that a lot of this information about Manson is coming from Vincent Bugliosi, who was the prosecutor in the case. So it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the truth in the sense that the prosecutor is trying a case and crafting its own propaganda along those lines. But still, they do know a lot about facts that the general public doesn't. So we'll just have to take this prosecutor at his word that this is actually what was going on with Charles Manson and the LaBianca murders. It's just fascinating how all of this Beatles mythology is infused into these ritual sacrifices, which then is tied directly into Rosemary's Baby via the fact that Polanski's wife was one of the individuals murdered by Manson's quote-unquote family, and she was 8 or 9 months pregnant at the time that she was murdered, allegedly, right? She is pregnant in the same way that 2001: A Space Odyssey and Rosemary's Baby are depicting these births, and it's like her pregnancy ended in this murder. It gave birth to something else in terms of propaganda, perhaps as that relates to the Beatles' association to Charles Manson and how this whole thing would help transform society. The Tate LaBianca murders were a series of murders perpetrated by members of the Manson family during August 9th to the 10th, 1969 in Los Angeles, California. Under the direction of Tex Watson and Charles Manson, the perpetrators killed 5 people on the night of August 8th to 9th. Pregnant actress Sharon Tate and her companions Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, and Frykowski, along with Stephen Parent. The following evening, the family murdered supermarket executive Lino LaBianca and his wife Rosemary at their home in the Los Feliz section of Los Angeles. A Rosemary is killed as a part of these murders at the same time that Polanski's pregnant wife is killed. And it happens on the same day, within the same window of time that the Beatles are taking that photo for their Abbey Road album, where they're walking across the zebra crossing. Sharon Tate is found on a zebra rug. This whole thing is sorcery on a scale that's difficult to comprehend. This is related to Sharon Tate. Her 1965 debut was in The Eye of the Devil. Star David Niven described her as a great discovery. Sharon filmed in Europe, then stayed in London, where she met actor and Oscar-nominated director Roman Polanski. French-born of Polish descent, he was a child Holocaust survivor and a rising star in movies. 10 years older than Sharon, he cast her in his 1966 film The Fearless Vampire Killers. This part horror, part comedy features Beatles connections in the cast. Sharon's father is played by Alfie Bass, the restaurant doorman from Help. Jesse Robbins, who was the Magical Mystery Tour's Aunt Jessie. Director Polanski co-starred in the movie. He and Sharon formed a relationship on set and would marry in 1968. Not only is there the Roman Polanski, Sharon Tate, Charles Manson Beatles connection, now Roman Polanski makes a film with Sharon Tate that features a bunch of Beatles connections as well. Which is The Fearless Vampire Killers. And prior to that, Tate makes her debut in Eye of the Devil. This is from Life magazine. The scene was inexplicable. In front of the beige velvet couch were the 2 major smears of blood, the one where hairstylist Jay Sebring fell next to the crumpled zebra rug, the other where Sharon Tate, stabbed a dozen times, slashed so brutally that murder became atrocity, collapsed and died in a jumble of oddities. A yellow candle stub, the yellow submarine, a teach-yourself Japanese instruction kit, a mauve bedroom slipper, a book on natural childbirth. The home was marked by tragedy, literally and figuratively. Blood was stained on the porch's stone threshold, and the word pig was written on the stark white farmhouse door. In December 1969, John and Yoko attended the premiere of Ringo's The Magic Christian in London, meeting Roman Polanski, who had a cameo in the film. It was released after the murders, so this can only be coincidence. Well, of course, this is how they write about this stuff. It reminds me of the Synchro Mystics. Well, it's just a coincidence. Just keep watching the movies and you'll become enlightened. Trust me. Trust me, bro. But scenes included red slogans doubled on white walls. Or scenes included red slogans daubed on white walls. Vote pig on a TV screen, and Peter Sellers' character disguising himself with a pig mask. This was just 4 months after the murders and surely made uncomfortable viewing for Polanski. So you have this inexplicable coincidence, which surely is not a coincidence, knowing how Hollywood operates and who these characters are, where Ringo Starr, a Beatle, is in the film The Magic Christian. John and Yoko attend, and Roman Polanski has a part in the film, and they directly reference the Tate LaBianca murders in terms of pig being written in red slogans on white walls, and how that related to the word pig being on the farmhouse door in Sharon Tate's blood, allegedly. And this is just 4 months after the murders. Polanski is there viewing this. You see, it's a ritual. They're all taking part in a grand ritual. Maybe some of them don't know that at the time, but people like Polanski know. They know what they're doing. When you're in the club of directors on that level, they know. Otherwise, the films would never be made how they are and wouldn't include what they include. Accordingly, there's no other conclusion than this is an intentional blood sacrifice ritual that is designed to power this illusion they are presenting. And remember, John Lennon then is directly involved in it via his own assassination. He was ritualistically sacrificed. Similarly, just because you're involved in it doesn't mean you escape it, right? That's got to be in the fine print on the dotted line that you sign in the contract. Somewhere in that fine print, quote unquote, Satan says, hey, I can do whatever I want with you as a part of what I'm giving you here, and it can happen at any time. Now, of course, we don't know for sure, because we're not at these crime scenes, whether these characters that are celebrities are actually dying. These are directors, as I was just referring to, who are skilled at presenting illusions, especially as it relates to filming things. So we can never be sure if something is real or just being presented as real, especially as technology improved and the ability to make things look real improved. But regardless, this is a ritual that is taking place here. And given the propensity to spill blood in other contexts and the general disregard that this intelligence has for us, it really seems like the simplest explanation would be they are actually sacrificing these people and spilling their blood, because it goes all the way back to the earliest recorded writings of this civilization that are recorded, where blood sacrifice was an actual thing that was taking place a lot. Why would it stop? This is the phone booth scene where Rosemary is shown calling Dr. Hill on the rotary phone while mouthing a series of numbers. And the numbers she mouths are 4377, meaningless numbers at first sight. Now, this interpretation is that if you invert the numbers, it spells out hell. But I'm more interested in the 77 Oz that's in there. as it relates to a phone booth or entering a portal, as it were. Doctor Who, right, travels through time through a phone booth. Superman becomes Superman in a phone booth. He enters as Clark Kent and comes out as this different entity. It's a similar idea of portals, time travel, and consciousness being sent from one place into another, being sent to the land of Oz, coming out of the phone booth as something else. And the phone booth itself is a tower, right? It's like a twin tower. In the context of Rosemary's Baby and what they are doing to our mind through this propaganda, yeah, maybe it's a hell portal, right? They're birthing this thing that is, quote unquote, Satan incarnate. It's this system that is that entity personified into the world through us and how we interact with everything else that is associated with it. In that way, it literally comes to life in our minds. It is birthed like Rosemary's Baby. Polanski's wife is murdered by Charles Manson's group, influenced by the Beatles to do so. And there's a Rosemary and a baby killed as a part of the murder. Symbolically, this ritual, blood spilling, evoking the idea of something being birthed into the world through the sacrifice. According to both Ira Levin's novel and Roman Polanski's script, the child's due date was sometime in June 1966. This is the 6th month with the last two numbers of the year being 66. Of course, the number 666 is considered the sign of the devil, which comes from the book of Revelation 13:18 in the Bible. But also, there's the idea that I went into in a prior video about reducing carbon and how that relates to 666. 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons. Which gets at the whole thing, right? The 2001 A Space Odyssey Stargate that burst the Moonchild, which has a dual meaning both in terms of the birth of Donald Trump, the Moonchild, and his role in the agenda as the personification of 9/11, as the twin of that event, the Gemini Man, but also as it relates to the mind merging with the screen itself, the mind merging with the monolith. The birth of the internet coincided with September 11, 2001, and culminated with the release of the Pocket monolith, right, in 2007, with the first iPhone. In that way, it was a ritual birthing the technology into the world through that ritual sacrifice of those people on September 11, 2001. The blood spilled there was similar to the blood spilled in the Manson murders, a symbolic birth. And likewise, it charged the 9/11 truth movement that they crafted from the beginning, like they always do, which then fused into Donald Trump as the conspiracy theorist president, which then morphed into QAnon, and QAnon will be what is used via the symbolic red hat as the new Nazis of the 21st century, who will be eventually censored and kicked out of society. After this is all said and done, red hat equals swastika. As the system brings on social credit scores and the blockchain, and similarly sells it as spiritual enlightenment, right? Sells it as an angel of light, coming to you with the thing that will fix the economy and fix everything. We just need this blockchain, and then everything that you ever do is recorded in real time and tracked by anybody, and the social credit score is born. as people cheer for it, right? They cheer for their own enslavement because it comes in the name of love. It comes in the name of saving you. Naturally, Donald Trump is a huge Bitcoin supporter. He's floating all these ideas about a strategic Bitcoin reserve for America that will defeat the banksters, quote unquote, right? And the banksters are 1,000 moves ahead of you if you are listening to that propaganda and thinking it's real. They're 1,000 moves ahead. They have planned the destruction of their old institutions into this whole thing. That's how it will be achieved. By design, Donald Trump is set in opposition to these old existing structures. But yes, June 1966, 666, and Donald Trump, the moonchild born in June of 1946, right? He's a June birth under a total lunar eclipse blood moon. And you have Rosemary's Baby, the idea of Satan itself, inseminating a woman with this child in the same way that it's depicted symbolically in 2001: A Space Odyssey. They are companion twin films bookended by 2 assassinations. I haven't even got to Tim Leary yet, which is a whole nother rabbit hole to go down as it relates to all of this stuff. This is a quote from Tim Leary. "I declare that the Beatles are mutants, prototypes of evolutionary agents sent by God, endowed with a mysterious power to create a new human species, a young race of laughing freemen." Well, there you go. Tim Leary is describing exactly what I was just going into, noting how the Beatles are this symbolic resonator that is designed to absorb collective energy and produce something from it. They are shifting consciousness, teaching people how to be a different thing, both through their music and then everything that they promote through the artificial popularity that was given to them. Tim Leary decided to run for governor of California in 1969 and asked Lennon to write his campaign song based on the slogan, "Come Together." And this is the song, "Come Together," that was eventually produced by the Beatles. Years earlier in 1966, as they tell the story, John Lennon goes to the Indica and buys Tim Leary's The Psychedelic Experience. Lennon begins working on Tomorrow Never Knows 5 days after he buys Leary's book and eventually incorporates some of Leary's words into song lyrics. Lennon said Leary was the one going around saying, "Take it, take it, take it." And we followed his instructions in his How to Take a Trip book. I did it just like he said in the book, and then I wrote Tomorrow Never Knows, which was almost the first acid song. Lay down all thoughts, surrender to the void, and all that shit which Leary had pinched from the Book of the Dead. This is the book that he's referring to, The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead by Tim Leary, Ralph Metzner, and Richard Alpert. John Lennon buys this book, makes a whole big deal about how Leary taught them how to take trips, psychedelically speaking, and then Tim Leary and his words become lyrics to a song on an album that's produced around the same time. Before I forget, this is the arch outside the Dakota near where John Lennon was assassinated in 1980. And I just want to note how it's a gateway arch in the same way that Donald Trump is associated with those 2 golden arches. So further, you have this idea of a ritual sacrifice of John Lennon by Mark David Chapman, who is said to have been similarly influenced by A Catcher in the Rye in a way like Charles Manson was influenced by the Beatles stuff and was seeing secret messages in there. In the film Conspiracy Theory with Mel Gibson and Julia Roberts, who of course was in Leave the World Behind, as that relates to Donald Trump, conspiracy theories, and the cyber attack, the whole thing, Mel Gibson likewise is given the role similar to Donald Trump as a character that's on your side, giving you the truth about Jesus, giving you the truth about everything else. He's one of you, I promise. Those two are in Conspiracy Theory, and his character can't stop buying A Catcher in the Rye because, as the story goes, it's seeded by J.D. Salinger with all of these MK Ultra type phrases that trigger an alter to come forward, which then goes on and does assassinations or whatever, and then the alter goes back and they have no memory of it. All these assassins, Chapman, Oswald, Sirhan, they all have this backstory that kind of gets at something like this taking place. I mean, with Oswald, they even say he was influenced by Sinatra movies, like there was stuff in there along these lines. Whether or not they can actually do this, I don't know. The ability to control our minds through propaganda, subliminal messaging, and subconscious propaganda leads me to believe that they cracked this code a long time ago, and they could actually do this to somebody if they wanted to. They could condition the mind to create an alter that would only come forward under hypnotic circumstances where a trigger phrase or something along those lines is presented to the person, and then this alter flips forward and that transpires. I mean, that's what happens to us, you see. Every time we tune into popular culture, we are triggered, and that alter comes forward and it takes over our mind on a mass scale in those moments. That's how September 11, 2001 worked. All that subconscious programming flipped forward on that morning, and we, in unison, like in some kind of hypnotic trance, all unanimously agreed, oh, hey, that's what happened. It's what they told us on the news. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And our emotions were affected by it. It's ritual magic. And this is all different scales of that. John Lennon assassinated outside of the Dakota, where the Bramford building was fictionally depicted in Rosemary's Baby. It's a nice, tidy loop between the Beatles, Roman Polanski, and Charles Manson. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the guru, quote-unquote, whom the Beatles visited with in 1968, popularized transcendental meditation, which has since been promoted by characters like David Lynch and many other celebrities. Deepak Chopra got his start with Maharishi before branching out on his own. Following the Beatles' endorsement of TM, Maharishi appeared on American magazine covers such as Life, Newsweek, and Time, while also appearing on The Tonight Show. That tells you everything you need to know, right? About where these gurus come from and what the New Age movement actually is. Why are these characters on The Tonight Show? Okay, because it's a coordinated agenda from day one. Merging Eastern thought with Western civilization. That is the new religion. In everything that entails. Maharishi allegedly made sexual advances towards Mia Farrow. All gurus are known to do this, right? They just can't help themselves. They're the ones giving you the truth, and yet somehow they're all behaving like this behind the scenes. Well, it's exactly what I was telling you. It's because these gurus are angels of light masquerading as that. They're not really that thing, and so their actions never match up to their words. But they're very good at speaking the words and pretending. Just like the entity that taught them all of that in the first place, right? The original entity, quote-unquote Satan, who masquerades as the angel of light, comes to you in the name of love. They were taught well. So all these gurus inevitably end up being shady characters that are nothing like what they preach. And transcendental meditation in particular, it's all about getting you to recite these mantras that are making direct contact with what I am describing here, right? It's making direct contact and allowing these entities to come into your mind and take you over. That's what it is. Get mad at me all you want. That's what it is. That's why it was promoted in mainstream American society by celebrities who have influence, or at least who used to have influence before everyone figured out what was really going on. Like the Beatles, Richard Alpert, Leary's colleague at Harvard, helped popularize Eastern spirituality and yoga in the West under the title Baba Ram Das. While not illegal at the time, Leary and Alpert were dismissed from Harvard in 1963 for their research on psychedelic drugs. In what was most likely a marketing strategy, due to the news of the big scandal at Harvard, many became aware of psychedelics for the first time. Leary continued to publicly promote psychedelic drugs and became a well-known figure of the counterculture of the 1960s, popularizing the phrase turn on, tune in, drop out. If you're bored one day, go read through Timothy Leary's Wikipedia page. It is absolutely ridiculous. I've never seen somebody have so many close calls with authority, have so many arrests and charges that magically disappeared and never amounted to him being in jail. It's like the guy was so obviously an intelligence operative of some kind to where he constantly got out of trouble. He even escaped from a prison one time. The whole thing is not believable in any way. The average person would never be able to get away with what Timothy Leary got away with, meaning he was placed in his position to do what he did, which is popularize the counterculture, popularize LSD and psychedelics in general, and everything that came along with that. And he was very vocal in his support for the Beatles, and he interacted with them, as I was previously going into. Because that was all one agenda, you see. There is no distinction between any of these characters. They were all controlled on some level to produce the counterculture. In 1963, Alpert, Leary, and their followers moved to the Hitchcock estate in Millbrook, New York, after International Federation for Internal Freedom's New York City branch director and Mellon Fortune Harris Peggy Hitchcock arranged for her brother Billy to rent the estate to IFIF. You have one of the original robber baron families, the Mellons, directly supporting Tim Leary and Alpert, or Ram Dass, in their psychedelic research. And of course, they're at Harvard doing this in the first place, before they got kicked out, quote unquote. That tells you everything you need to know. Alpert and Leary immediately set up a communal group with former Harvard psilocybin project members at the estate, commonly known as Millbrook, and the IFIF was subsequently disbanded and renamed the Castalia Foundation. The group sometimes included Beat Generation poets Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, Ken Kesey, Artie Lang, Alan Watts, Charles Mingus, and Maynard Ferguson. Like Deepak Chopra, Richard Alpert, or Ram Dass, is promoted by Oprah Winfrey. His book Be Here Now was one of the first guides to becoming a yogi for those not born Hindu. For its influence on the hippie movement and subsequent spiritual quote-unquote movements, the book has been described as a countercultural Bible, seminal to the era. This is like A Course in Miracles, right? The New Age Bible. Oh, by the way, the authors are channelers associated with the CIA. You know, this is a similar thing. Oh, by the way, Ram Dass, Be Here Now, countercultural Bible, promoted by Oprah. And colleagues with Tim Leary. The book has been hailed as influential by the likes of ex-Beatle George Harrison, who used it as a title of a song. Go figure, we have the Beatles involved again, and Apple co-founder Steve Jobs, among many others. In 1978, Ram Dass and Larry Brilliant co-founded the Siva Foundation. Larry Brilliant is an epidemiologist who served as an advisor on the film Contagion. And remember, Contagion was about a coronavirus pandemic that came out in 2011. And very closely mirrored what would actually transpire with the actual COVID-19 pandemic. On February 22nd, 2006, Google Inc. appointed Larry Brilliant as the executive director of Google.org, the philanthropic arm of Google, a position which he held until April 2009 when he joined the Skoll Foundation as its president, the philanthropic organization established by former eBay president Jeff Skoll. Ram Dass, or Richard Alpert, directly involved with Larry Brilliant. Very important connection there. Tim Leary would often declare his friends to be quote-unquote godsons, and Joy Ito was one of them. This is Joy Ito. Joy Ito is a Japanese entrepreneur and venture capitalist. He is the president of Chiba Institute of Technology, former director of the MIT Media Lab, former professor of the practice of media arts and sciences at MIT, and a former visiting professor of practice at Harvard Law School. And I went into Joy Ito in a video I did a few years ago now, as it related to his role with MIT Media Lab and the Digital Currency Initiative. As it happens, Joy Ito had to resign from MIT because he was directly receiving funds from Jeffrey Epstein. Personal loans from Epstein, $1.2 million. In addition to kind of being the point man for the funds that MIT itself was receiving from Epstein as well. So Joy Ito is a direct connection to Jeffrey Epstein in that whole world. And Tim Leary named Joy Ito as one of his godsons. They were really good friends. And it's the craziest thing. I haven't had this happen to me in a long time, but I was doing research on Joy Ito from old stuff I had compiled. And I clicked on the link that I have down here. I started reading the page, and it's all about how Tim Leary went to Japan and had started turning his focus to digital technology and the internet and that whole thing. And of course, this was by design, right? His handlers told Tim Leary to do this. And so he starts making contacts with people that can serve this function. He meets Joy Ito in Japan, and it transpires in a way where Joy Ito takes Timothy Leary around Japan, shows him all the clubs. Joy Ito is big in the club scene. He knows the nightlife, and that's very interesting as it relates to human trafficking as well. But Joy Ito shows Tim Leary around Japan. They become really good friends. At least that's how they sell the story, right? Most likely the handlers brought these two together, and then they tell that story after the fact to make it seem like they just befriended each other by coincidence. Then Joy Ito tells the story about how he went to California and Tim Leary plugged him in to the scene in California and the United States in general and made all his contacts. I read about that. I exit out of everything one night, and then I go back to the site to copy and paste a few things to put in here, and the whole website's down. JoyIto.com is just entirely down right now. And I can't access the Wayback Machine, so I included the link here if some of you guys want to type this into the Wayback Machine and see if you can access the files, just so you can see that I'm not lying to you. Like, I have a pretty good memory. I remember what I read, and it is explicitly stated by Joy Ito that Tim Leary was directly responsible for plugging him into everything. And then Joy Ito is directly plugged into Jeffrey Epstein. So connect the dots, guys. Okay? This is one gigantic network that is handled by entities that aren't on the game board. Okay? But that's what it is. And Joy Ito is directly involved in the digital currency initiative at MIT. He's directly involved in Bitcoin, which should tell you everything you need to know about Bitcoin, but apparently some people are so under the spell that they still can't see it, which is understandable because we're all under the spell at some point in our lives. This is a YouTube video where Joy Ito talks about his friendship with Tim Leary. This is the Beatles in India, which I already got into a little bit regarding the Maharishi Transcendental Meditation and how these experiences shaped the White Album, which is what Charles Manson used to justify the murders. And as the story goes, there was a music executive that used to live at the house that Polanski and Tate were renting. And they tell the story like Charles Manson thought that music executive still lived there, who turned Manson down because he wanted to be a musician. And that's why he sent his quote unquote family there to kill whoever would be in the house. That's the story they tell anyway. But this is directly related to New Age beliefs, and just go to the Wikipedia page and read all of this stuff. If you hear people using any of these words, you know that they're under mind control. It's just the facts. I didn't do it, okay? I didn't do any of this. I'm just telling you the facts here, based on all of this circumstantial evidence. 2012 phenomenon, Ashtar, Aura, Chakra, Deva, Earth changes, Earth mysteries, energy, eternal now, higher self, Huna, indigo children, perennial philosophy, psychometry, pyramid power, quantum mysticism, self-help books, soulmate, spiritual but not religious, star people, third eye, affirmations, breathwork, creative visualization, crystal healing, kundalini yoga, neo-shamanism, neo-tantra, psychological astrology, sun sign astrology, transcendental meditation, Age of Aquarius, Gaianism, Mayanism, Michael teachings, Ramtha, Seth material. That's it in a nutshell. And the Beatles were designed to popularize all of this stuff at the ground level, right? Get it to the point where the occult writings would be more penetrable by the average person. Oh, speaking of Rosemary's Baby and Polanski and Lennon and the Dakota, The Ninth Gate was released on March 10th, 2000, which has a similar theme where Johnny Depp's character is attempting to contact Lucifer or Satan, however you want to describe it. And this has direct tie-ins to Charles Manson, Revolution 9 and Revelation 9, and the gate idea, the stargates or the portal. And then John Lennon sacrificed outside of this gate, which is featured in Rosemary's Baby. Right before September 11th, 2001, the Ninth Gate. This idea of contacting this entity through this ritual. And entity can be viewed broadly there in terms of the propaganda being an entity. You're making contact with it, making contact with these egregores that shape your mind and ultimately create an altar that flips forward and takes over your mind. You're making contact with that. You're sent to the land of Oz that is this propaganda. And you're making contact with, quote unquote, Satan in the sense that it is creating the propaganda in the first place. So in a sense, you are absorbing its thoughts and becoming it through this process. Ultimately, that's deeper than the eyes merging with the screen idea. This is your soul merging with Satan. You know what I mean? It's all happening at the same time. in the same process. It's just different fractal scales of it. Whatever you pay attention to will show you the thing. And then finally, at the end of 1968, there's the Apollo 8 mission, which was the first crewed spacecraft to leave Earth's gravitational sphere of influence and the first human spaceflight to reach the moon. This is the patch here where you see the 8 being made around the Earth and the moon, which really gets at the idea of the moon child and its association to 8 as it relates to making contact with this portal. Symbolically, through this occult NASA ritual, they show you the 8 in 1968 as it relates to this larger ritual and propaganda in general. This is Jimmy Savile with the Beatles. They had a pretty close relationship with Savile and interacted with him a lot. And to get an idea of controlled opposition and how this works, then you have a tweet from Elon Musk where he says Jimmy Savile, longtime BBC employee, raped over 400 children while being paid millions by the BBC. Elon Musk is allowed to say this true thing and quote-unquote expose it because they have already crafted the controlled opposition into the script where QAnon discusses true things like this, but places it in the context of Republicans versus Democrats in the United States of America. The truth versus the deep state. And so anything that is true that Elon Musk says here will be discarded by 50% of the population. I mean, people are out there burning Teslas because of this fake propaganda. They think Elon Musk is a real person with real opinions along these lines, and they're burning cars with his name on it, or the company that he represents. So what do you think they're going to do with a tweet like this? You think they're going to find it believable in any way? No, they're immediately going to say, oh yeah, he's just one of those QAnon people that thinks it's Democrat operatives in the deep state drinking children's blood. They're crazy. And that's how you diffuse these issues, right? It's all meticulously planned in advance. Not surprisingly, QAnon's unexpected roots in New Age spirituality. You can see this most clearly in the people who promote QAnon that also promote the idea of mass arrests that are coming, because the New Age con artists have been talking about mass arrests since the early 2000s, right? That's been a very significant part of the rhetoric that they used. So they just updated that rhetoric to appeal to boomers via QAnon. But even more broadly, it has roots in New Age spirituality, and you will find many people on the quote-unquote far right that talk about this stuff using New Age buzzwords that I went over on the Wikipedia page. They just kind of morph it a little bit to fit Donald Trump and how he's operating. Leading the United States to this new golden age, right? This new era of peace and prosperity, defeating the deep state. It's a similar narrative, it's just brought into the physical world a little bit more. Especially since they contextualize Donald Trump as representing the rise in Christian nationalism, so it has this Christian angle to it that the New Age is opposed to, or at the very least distorts into the idea of, oh, it's just Christ consciousness. That's all that meant. You can do that too. You can be that. So go figure, QAnon's unexpected roots in New Age spirituality, not an accident. Speaking of which, the 1970s saw an explosion in fascination with all things magical and demonic, rising out of the counterculture of the 1960s. Rosemary's Baby can't be blamed for the founding of the Church of Satan, which was established by Anton LaVey the year before the book was published. But it may have accidentally functioned as an ad for Satanism. LaVey even started a myth that he was a technical consultant on Rosemary's Baby, and that he had been the actor inside the devil costume on set. Along those lines, the Catholic Church gave Rosemary's Baby a C rating, which meant condemned. And 1968 also marked the change in how they rated the movies. And as a result of the change, they were allowed to put all kinds of stuff in films that they had not been able to in years prior. So this whole era represented this shift in what people were consuming and allowing into their mind. Referring to the Beatles, American writer Tim Leary wrote that the band were the wisest, holiest, most effective avatars, divine incarnate God agents that the human race has ever produced. And that sums up the whole thing, right? No, they weren't any of those things. That was the marketing that was surrounding the Beatles, and accordingly they reached an artificial level of popularity that allowed them to function on that level, to influence, to steer culture in a certain direction, to unknowingly infuse the mind with all these new ideas that would lead down the path to where we are today. Satan, quote unquote, will always come to you in the name of love. It masquerades as an angel of light. And Tim Leary explains it to you here.